Greetings and welcome to Morphin Masterclass. I'm your host, Jake Brody, and I am no reporter or professional interviewer. I am merely a student, much like yourself, hoping to learn some small sliver of the magic behind the exceptionally long-running Power Rangers franchise, so that I may share some of that knowledge with you, dear viewers, and perhaps become part of that magic myself one day. For today's guest, we have the acclaimed writer, producer, director, and showrunner of the popular adaptation of Tokume Sentai Go Busters, Power Rangers Grid Defense. Ranger fans, please welcome one Mr. Jacob Brody.
Hi Jake, glad to be a part of the show.
Well, I must say it is a great honor to be able to pick the mind of the creator of the first season of Power Rangers under the current Hasbro regime. Now,
You do realize that Power Rangers Grid Defense is not actually a canon season of Power Rangers, right?
but I recall they adapted Go Busters as an official season of Power Rangers after having previously skipped it, isn't that correct?
Oh, it's true that I did adapt Tokume Sentai Go Busters into the fan film Power Rangers Grid Defense, which was just a single episode, not a full season. But then, that was in 2016 and 2019, was when Hasbro, after purchasing the franchise, ended up adapting Tokume Sentai Go Busters as well into Power Rangers Beast Morphers, which did run for 2 seasons from 2019 to 2020.
Oh, I see. Well, in that case, since you are already here, do you have any other projects that you would like to speak about?
Okay, sure. Well, I've been working for the last 10 years on an ongoing web series called Database Rangers Power Reviews. It is a video review series / fan film series. It kind of meshes those two genres together, where a character played by me reviews Power Rangers episodes in each video of the series, and then over time comes to realize that he is actually a Power Rangers character, and he ends up tying his experiences into the broader mythology of the Power Rangers universe for a whole string of adventures that are going to be culminating in the upcoming 3-part finale with episodes 98, 99, and 100. Oh my, 10 years, 100 episodes, that sounds like quite the accomplishment. Well, I mean, yeah, it wasn't intended to take 10 years. Technically speaking, this is going to be the year 3 finale.
The year 3 finale. Sounds like you may have been off by...
Yeah, 7 years. Off by 7 years, just about. Thereabouts. I'm still working on it. I was going to try and have that out by now. Didn't work out. Still working on it. It's coming along. You should actually see what I have worked out so far. It's really looking quite good, I think. I'm quite proud of the work that we've done.
Well, I do believe that we do somehow have a clip. You did provide a clip for this interview.
Oh, that's right, I did. I provided a clip. So yes, this is a preview clip from the 98th episode, the first part of the 3-part finale of Database Rangers Power Reviews.
Excellent. Now, this is what I understand to be a very rough cut. Computer-generated imagery, sound mixing, and other effects still have yet to be added. Can you tell us what is going on in this clip that we're about to see?
This picks up right from where the end of episode 97 left off. Database Ranger, in his morphed canon form of the Phantom Ranger, has just finished communing with the spirit of Zordon in an interdimensional space called the Hiatus, when all of a sudden he's been interrupted by the arrival of his 2 greatest enemies. Dark Spectre, who has taken on a form that is a copy of his physical body, played by me, as well as the reanimated spirit of Darkonda, who for most of these shots is also played by me. So here we have him working to deal with the fact that his two greatest enemies have just arrived, and it's definitely going to be a longer clip, but I hope that you enjoy it.
Greetings, Ranger. What? No welcome? Here we are, then. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
Database, you have to get out of there! We have no way to fight—
Nothing left to do but...
You know what? You're right. I've been rude. I do owe you a welcome. Where are my manners? You know, I've always had trouble reaching out to people, making friends. Sometimes it feels like I'm invisible. You know what I mean? You know what I mean. And that was true even before you locked me away in an existential prison and rewrote my memories, which, I'm not gonna lie, I'm still not super happy about. But that's still no excuse not to be a proper host. So, Dark Spectre, former High Mucky Muck of all evil, former Lava Demon, all that business, and Dark Honda, that is you, right? I see that you've done something new with your whole, look thing, which I know is all kind of a blur right now, but I can see that you're going for it, and you've clearly got a lot of inner conflict going on there. But still, it just blows me away to see you again after all these years. Both of you. And I know that you're not exactly Ranger fans, but I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, greetings and welcome to Power Reviews.
What on earth is he doing out there?
Has he lost his mind? I don't think so.
You know, I've reviewed a lot of Power Rangers episodes in my day. And honestly, a lot of them haven't been great. I mean, come on. 19 episodes of Samurai and Super Samurai, 41 Megaforce / Super Megaforce reviews? I must be some sort of glutton for punishment.
That seems like an understatement.
But I still love it, you know? There's always something to love.
The action, the adventure, the well-intentioned lessons, and so many crazy concepts and characters. Plus the mind just reels over the production of bringing it all together.
I'll make your mind reel.
And I've felt that way since before I even found out I was a ranger. The Phantom Ranger of all things. Can you believe it? I mean, of course you can. You guys knew me back in the day.
You're right, Kay. Reaching out to people, crazy characters, bringing things together. He's trying to buy time for us to finish the communications relay. We can't let him down. Understood?
Righto!
But I realized, after all this time, I've never once talked about what my favorite episode is. The one that my mind always comes back to. The one that changed my understanding of the series. The one that made me realize the heights that this franchise is capable of. So you know what? Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about the two-part finale of my favorite season of all time, starting with episode 42 of Power Rangers in Space.
Is he really doing this?
He's really doing this.
Please don't do this.
Countdown to Destruction, Part 1.
So there you have it. The opening scene from episode 98 of Database Rangers Power Reviews. Our first part of the finale is going to be Countdown to Destruction Part 1. And in light of it not being able to be released on the 10-year anniversary, as I had previously been hoping for, I have decided instead that its new release date has been pushed to November 20th, which those eagle-eyed Power Rangers, Database Rangers Power Reviewed fans should recognize as a very significant date. The actual original airing date of Countdown to Destruction Part 1, November 20th, 1998. So, hopefully, that should be easy for you all to remember. It's going to be November 20th, 98.
Very impressive. I can't wait to see the finished product. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what went into creating that?
Okay, so basically, just like with any episode of Power Reviews, it always starts with the writing process. Like, I need to first watch the episode that I'm reviewing. I watch it through once over, taking notes on all the key plot points that I think are worth discussing. If it's an episode I really like, that'll be a lot of the episode, as is going to be the case here with Countdown to Destruction, which, yay, finally getting to talk about that. And after I take those notes, copy any quotes that seem like I'm going to be using for audio clips, I then go through and I start writing the episode itself. Now, no, before I even get into all that, I've had this outline in my mind from very early on of what the overall shape of the season was going to be, as well as which episodes I was going to be reviewing. So at this point, I do know in general which plot points I'm going to be hitting, and I make sure that as I was taking those notes, I also make little notes alongside them, like, oh, this is a good point to bring up this plot point, this is a good point to bring up that plot point. And so then I go through and I actually write the script itself. And I just do a play-by-play through watching the episode as I'm writing the script. I'm describing what I'm seeing, and then I pause and I cut away to whichever scene feels most relevant in that moment. It's very improvisational in that regard, even though it is really thoroughly planned out in terms of what the story is, but it's really the matter of finding the plot, the details of the plot as I'm working through it. And when I say the details of the plot, I don't mean like the plot points, I mean more so the execution. What words am I going to be using? What's going to be the dialogue? I really just sort of find my way through it and think about, well, what would this character be saying at this time? Oh, we've hit that point. That character would have something to say there. And I'm just constantly thinking in terms of the motivations of the characters and what they would want to say, and how what they're talking about reflects the actions that the events that they're engaged in. So it's a complex mental process that I can't fully convey as much as I would very much like to try to. But that's really where each episode starts. I have a premise in my mind of what's going to be happening. I watch the episode to get the details, and then I start scripting it out.
So, how many drafts do you generally go through when working on one of these scripts?
Oh, I'm actually almost a little embarrassed to say that just about every episode of Power Reviews is working off the first draft version of the script.
Really?
Yeah, basically, I know that traditionally speaking, you know, if you are a screenwriter, you go through many, many drafts. I've worked on a number of spec scripts, and I always want to try and be perpetually fine-tuning and finessing and trying to restructure the scenes and discover the best jokes to hit, and whatever it may be. It takes work and reflection and fine-tuning and editing to really get a spec script that's clean and fits within the time frame that you want it to fit within. But with Power Reviews, these are scripts that are often being done on a very accelerated timetable. I basically write the scene, and then immediately, as soon as I have it and I'm ready, I try to start coordinating the filming of it. And because it's so dependent on so many other actors and their availability, and these are all people who are volunteering their time, I may script a scene where I know that I'm going to need to be filming with that actor the next day, so I don't have time to finesse and edit it when I know I'm going to be filming with that actor the next day. But I might not be able to film the other side of that conversation until years later, so I can't really tweak things in the intervening time without like things falling apart that need to stay together the way they are. So things get locked in very fast. Wow, that sounds like quite a challenge. Oh yeah, it's tough, but it's really linked to how I've had most of my experiences with writing scripts. So this sort of very fast, sort of off the cuff, writing it as you're thinking of it, just, throwing everything against the wall and basically keeping everything there. has been how I've scripted this show, with the more detailed elements of the plot running through the entire series largely kept in my mind or kept in notes that are jotted down in little separate files. But rarely is anything scripted that is changed once it's reached the scripting process.
Now, you said that this is a reflection of how you've written scripts in the past. What is your personal writing experience?
Well, I started writing scripts, like actual scripts, back in college. My first real experience that I can remember was through an event that my college theater group would do every year, or sometimes even multiple times a year, called Theater Slam. And the idea with Theater Slam was that you would meet up at like 8 o'clock on a Friday night to write a show. And whatever show you were writing, you would have to perform the following night at 8 o'clock that Saturday. So I did every single one of those whenever they were happening. And I always had like a lot of fun working that out. I was like the Theater Slam guy. So the very first one I ever went to was my freshman year, and I didn't have a huge part in the script because it was really the seniors who were taking the lead, but I still performed within it, and I still contributed what I could, and it was a lot of fun, and as the years went by, I became more and more engaged with that. So later on, I was the one largely running the Theater Slams because I was the one who had the most experience. I think I ended up doing like, I want to say around 10 over the course of about 5 years.
Would you say that's a lot?
Yeah, nobody else did that many because they're exhausting, and I don't recommend being up for 24 hours straight. It's not a good idea, generally speaking, for your personal health. My wife, who I was dating back in college, had to nurse me back to health after one of those. Just like I was laid out flat in the dorm bed and just chugging down orange juice because I was sick as a dog. Because it was always right around finals week as well, which was a really hectic time to be trying to do something like that. But after I'd done that my freshman year, I then had some experience where I wanted to do directing. There was a collection of student one acts that they would do every year called Evening of Performance. And during my sophomore year, I put in to direct, and I directed a really fun 1 hour farce called Trevor. It's a blast. That was actually one of the earliest collaborations between me and my wife MJ because they were cast in that show. But after I directed Trevor, we were going to be doing a student orientation experience that following school year, so that would be going into my junior year.
So another opportunity to develop your directorial pedigree.
Yes, and because I had so much fun, and everybody else had so much fun working on Trevor, it seemed like it would be a good idea for me to put in for the next opportunity to direct with my theater group, which was going to be this freshman orientation experience at the beginning of the next year, which would have been my junior year. And so I had submitted a play, but for whatever reason, my email didn't go through to the producer, who expressed surprise later when I went up to her. I'm like, so when are you going to be choosing the shows for the first year experience plays? And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, the deadline passed. I'm like, yes, I know the deadline passed. That's why I'm asking when you're going to choose. And she's like, well, you never submitted anything. I'm like, yes, I did. So I showed her the email, and she was like, oh no, I've already alerted the other 3 people who are going to be the directors. But you know what? All of their plays have really small casts. Maybe we could do a 4th play. We need to do a 4th play with a smaller cast, like only 6 people. If you could if you can get me that, within the next few weeks, I think I can slot you in. So, like, I'm in the middle of the school year. It took me forever to find the script that I wanted to do, and that had too many people. So I was thinking, like, how am I going to find a script with the right number of people in the right time frame? It's a short length. How am I going to make this work? And I knew it was going to happen. I knew I had to write it. And sure enough, I wasn't able to get down to the library to find a script. I knew it would be faster for me to write a script because of my experiences with the theater slams. So I just sat down in the lobby of the theater for like a straight day and just wrote out a script about a guy in my situation having to come up with a script at the very last minute. And it was literally called a last minute script. And they were all very, like, transparent self-insert characters. But, they still ended up choosing the script. And then later on, one of the other directors dropped out. And so I then had to expand upon that script, as I then became one of the 3 remaining directors. And the response was amazing. And part of that was because the other students knew the people who I was spoofing on. I was spoofing on myself, I was spoofing on my roommate, I was spoofing on the producer and her boyfriend, and the other directors. And people were losing their minds over seeing themselves get lampooned in that way. And to the extent that my good friend Justin actually helped lift me up onto shoulders for the applause, and it was such an incredible feeling. And I just mentioned Justin. He's been my friend since college, and he is among the main characters of Power Reviews. He plays the role of Mitch Moore-Postner.
Sounds like integrating your friends into your scripts has been a practice you've been engaged with for quite some time.
Yes. I've always had this love of meta-narrative. Really, with that first script, I really just went all out on the whole idea of playing around with the creative process. And the other script that I was going to direct was one called Cut, which was a very meta play where, like, you have actors performing and then the director yells cut, and he comes in to give them notes. But then some other director yells cut, and you realize that first director was just another actor. And then as the second director is giving notes, a third director comes in and yells cut, and there's just so many, and the layers just keep going. It's a play within a play within a play within a play. And I've always loved that idea of the meta-narrative, the idea of a story that is commenting on the medium in which it is being presented in a very deliberate way, which I think is really carried through into my work with Power Reviews, as well as my video that I did last year for the 9-year anniversary of the channel, exploring where I did an analysis of Bo Burnham's Inside, which is, again, very meta in a lot of its themes.
If I recall correctly, the premise of that work was that Bo Burnham was locked inside of a room for a year, working through the deep sense of isolation that comes with individually producing a deeply personal, semi-autobiographical, semi-satirical creative work.
Yes, and boy, did that one hit hard. Yeah, if people have a chance to check out that video from last year, I got into a lot of my personal experiences and influences, and how I feel about the work that I do and all the complexity that goes into that. It was very cathartic in a lot of ways, and it's wild that it's been a whole nother year since that video, and I'm still in that same sort of place where I'm in this sort of mixed feeling of doing these meta-narratives, but also telling these stories about how I feel about my meta-narrative.
I imagine that one could easily go cross-eyed from that level of contextual introspection.
Yeah, it's wild that I've managed to keep all this in my head. It's something that I've always sort of had a skill with. Likely due to being on the autism spectrum, fairly certain on that front. My mind just tends to latch on to certain things, especially when they are presented within the context of a narrative. So I've always been very good at remembering trivia, for example. I was the Power Rangers trivia champion at Power Morphicon. And I was the trivia champion on RangerCast. They had a weekly AIM chat while I was in college where I would just destroy the competition like every week as we did sort of a buzz-in first with your answer trivia competition. And even when I was in the theater, I was in the Theater Honor Society as their archivist because I was very good at keeping track of what everybody had done in terms of performance and who everybody was. And that was a big part of the archivist position. So my mind's always been kind of well-tuned to keeping certain details in mind if they are relevant to something that I happen to find particularly fascinating. Even if it's something I've only seen once. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that, when I'm doing these analyses, like, it may have even not been an episode that I've seen that many times. Maybe I just saw an episode once, and I know what I want to say about it, but I just rewatch it to make sure that I'm hitting the exact details correctly and really hammering in those details. But yes, so I realized I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but my writing experiences did initiate with those experiences in college, and that really shaped my sort of last minute writing process where, even for the next few years, I would continue doing the theater slams, I would continue doing the first year experiences as director, and 3 out of the 4 plays that I directed for the freshman orientations were plays that I wrote myself, usually in a very short time frame. And they were all sort of exploring the idea of a play within a play. So I had Last Minute Script, another one was Tech Sunday Matinee, which sort of poked fun at the Tech Sunday rehearsal and the idea of what it would be like if an audience showed up to one of those. And then Theatrics, which was playing with the audition process and the wacky people you encounter at auditions and the doubts that directors may have about their creative process. Those were all very comedic plays. And after experimenting with that, I did get into one drama that I wrote and directed called The Unfinished Song, which was my first longer piece that really delved into themes of identity, and I was really aiming for the sort of show that would almost play like a Twilight Zone episode. You watch it once, and then you get to the twist at the end, and you want to watch it again with that new context. And that was where I really started to integrate that other half of Power Reviews into my writing. That idea that you write things in such a way that they could be viewed through 2 different lenses, depending upon the context that you have.
And this is something that has been a part of Power Reviews since the beginning?
Yes. Basically from, not quite the first episode, but very early on, I started seeding in pieces of the plot and what would eventually come to be pieces of foreshadowing for the eventual reveal of Database Ranger being the Phantom Ranger, an amnesiac Phantom Ranger. I've also played with themes of memory. That was another part of The Unfinished Song. So when you eventually got to the reveal of who he was, not only did it make sense at some sort of subconscious level, but you would also have a reason to revisit those previous episodes with that new knowledge and see, oh, this was foreshadowing this was foreshadowing that, this is the first time that appeared, and that's been there this whole time. A good example is the wireless interdimensional interface.
Ah, yes, the we, as it were.
Yes, it does play with the acronym of it being a Wii, because it is, the prop is, a Nintendo Wii. But it's also a major plot point that this was a device that was used to cross dimensions. And we first see it in a quick gag in the second episode, which teases the idea of it being a crack between dimensions. And then we have the payoff way later in episode 49, where it's suddenly revealed to actually be a device that can be used for interdimensional portal stabilization. And then its actual origin isn't revealed until episode 92, which adds that extra context of how did it get there, and it got there because of it being originally a part of the Phantom Ranger ship, and various parts of the apartment were the result of the Phantom Ranger ship being dismantled by Dark Spectre, and him using those pieces of the ship in this apartment that he created.
This again plays into that long-term planning and attention to detail.
Yes, exactly. So, getting back to, I think, what was your original question again? I'm trying to remember how this got started.
Oh, I was asking about what went into the creation of that scene that we saw earlier.
Oh, right. Okay, so, when it comes to, once I have the script, I then need to start thinking about how I'm going to film it. And sometimes that can be very straightforward, especially in the early episodes. I knew every shot was just going to be me sitting down in a chair, put the camera in front of me, I do all my lines, do all my voiceovers, and then I point the camera over to MJ for the Dr. K scenes. But when it comes to scenes like the one that we just saw, which are far more complex, I need to sometimes do a full-on shot-by-shot breakdown. So that means that, especially when it comes to action sequences, that requires a tremendous amount of self-reflection and detail as I'm going through it. And I remember when I was looking at this particular script, I had a general idea in my mind of what the action scene was going to look like. I had vague pictures in my mind of what I wanted it to look like. But when I actually decided, okay, I need to choreograph this scene and go through shot by shot so I know what I'm shooting for this action sequence, was when I realized how much of a challenge I just created for myself.
And what sort of challenge did you create for yourself?
Well, the thing is, the premise of this scene is that Database is trying to buy time for the others to call for reinforcements. So it's a distraction fight. It's very much him trying to keep the focus on himself and just trying to buy time. So he's being very much sort of the Spider-Man style motor mouth throughout all of this. And I'd written out the whole opening dialogue-wise before I actually choreographed the fight. And so when I went to choreograph the fight, I'm like, okay, so this fight scene, he needs to do that, he needs to do that, he needs to do that. I've only gotten through a sentence. This is 4 paragraphs. What have I done? 4 paragraphs. What have I done? Oh my. Okay, so I've made this huge mountain for myself.
Oh, that is who you put yourself in some trouble, good sir.
You are correct on that front. So I'm sitting in a library. I didn't mention earlier, but I am a high school physics and math teacher, and this was on like a student award night, and I just had some time to kill in between the end of classes and the parents arriving. So I was sitting down in the library, going over my script, and working out this choreography just in the middle of the library. So I loosened my shirt a little bit, took all the stuff out of my pockets, and I'm just working out this fight scene. And I'm just saying the dialogue, and I'm like, okay, what motion would I be making here? Okay, I'm jumping in, I'm going to do this sweep kick, I'm going to do that kick. Okay, what would this character do in response? And then I go from having just acted out the Phantom Ranger's action to acting out the Landlord's action, or Darkonda's action. And so I'm having this whole fight scene between me, myself, and I, which is ridiculous.
It does sound ridiculous, I'm not going to lie.
It is absolutely ridiculous. And then like every now and again, like my principal would walk in to like check in on something. I'd just be like, hey, how's it going? I'm just kind of like doing this fight scene thing. Just don't worry about it. And so I create a shot list as I'm going through. I'm like, okay, shot 1, he jumps in. Shot 2, he does the sweep kick and the front kick to the face. And shot 3, we have the dodge of the face. And the number of shots is directly reliant upon what I'm doing with the camera and what I can do with the camera. That's the biggest influence in terms of how many shots it ends up being. Not just how many shots I want, but how many shots I can actually I need in order to create the effects that I'm going for here.
Is that something you can elaborate on?
So a running thing with Power Reviews is that it's always a stationary camera. In universe, we have what's called these selective quantum utility electronic eyeline, which is this little invisible floating camera that can teleport. It's only ever in one place at a time, and then it teleports to a different place, and that's what we experience as the cuts. And that's tied into directly how I'm able to film it, because I don't have a camera crew. All I have is a tripod. I'm on screen most of the time. I can't have anyone else moving the camera for me. So I decided that I would just commit to the idea of this stationary camera throughout the show, with very few exceptions. Basically, the live Power Morphicon episode 67, is pretty much the only exception that we've really seen in the series where the camera actually moves. And I just kind of internally, I write that off as just being like a weirdness of traveling to that dimension. But for everything else, the camera's always stationary, and therefore, if I'm engaging in any action where I need to see the other side of it, I need to have a cut. If the action goes too far to the edge of the frame, I need a cut. Is something getting obscured? Is there something that I want to place a greater focus on? I need to have a cut. I can't do a pan or a zoom in or tilt. It always needs to be a cut. So that scene, I think the action sequence has about 50 shots to it, because it's like, okay, he's doing kicks. You can only see them from this angle. They're doing punches in response. You can only see it from that angle. He's just dropped down. If I want to see him, I need to cut to another angle. And it's also all reliant upon what I'm physically able to do, which is not everything that you see the Phantom Ranger doing. I do not know, I cannot really do a flying kick. I can't really do a handspring or a flip. So anytime that I'm doing that, I need there to be cut there, because I need there to be the cut from, okay, he's jumping up, and then he's in the flying kick, and then he's landing, because otherwise you're going to see me jumping off a chair to do the flying kick and landing super awkwardly, or you'll see me trying to put myself into a handstand and then falling backwards to show the end of the handspring. And then there's things that get into play, the work of compositing. I need to make sure they're framed in such a way that I'm going to be able to insert the CG elements, specifically Darkonda's face, that's a CG element. So every shot, I need to make sure that I'm not having a physical person blocking Darkonda's face. Because if I do, I'm going to have to cut around that person. Or at the very least, never in any shots where I have multiple people actually in the frame. Which is a weird distinction to have to make, and I can elaborate on that.
Yes, please do.
Well, a lot of what you're seeing in that scene is really just me. I'm often composited with myself. It's all in front of a green screen. So any shot in that fight sequence where the two characters aren't in contact with one another, they're both played by me, generally speaking. So that way, any scene with Darkonda, I don't need to worry about, is somebody passing in front of him, because there's nobody else there until I put that extra layer on with the Phantom Ranger in front of him, or the Landlord in front of him, whichever it might be. And that allows me to also play around with the idea of him bursting apart and then coming back together, and all those other little effects, or the Phantom Ranger turning invisible. And that also limits how much time I need to secure from my actors. So I have my stuntman, Yash, who is my stunt double. So anytime that the Phantom Ranger and the Landlord are in contact with one another, the Phantom Ranger is being played by Yash at that time, because my face needs to be my face for the Landlord. Of course, that makes sense. And then for any case where it needs to be in contact with Darkonda, I bring in my other stuntman for that scene, Dan, who played an Alphabet Soup agent who appeared back in episodes 79 and 80, the year 2 finale. And I bring him in because he's very tall. He's about 6'5", and Darkonda is supposed to be a 7-foot tall monster. So I need to have that height discrepancy when we're in contact with one another. But in any other case, it's just me scaled up. So I just, or having everybody else scaled down, more likely. So that's another thing that goes into working through that sort of scene when I'm working out what sort of shots I need to make. And it's a very complex process that, even I have trouble keeping track of all of it in my head, because I'm often having to put myself in the mindset of multiple characters at once and remembering, okay, you're doing this right now, but you're doing this right now, and you're doing this right now, and it's all happening simultaneously.
That does sound very challenging. Where did you learn how to engage in these sorts of action sequences?
Well, I wouldn't say that I have any sort of... I haven't gone through any sort of formal learning process on this. It's really been sort of finding my path and what works for me. A lot of it just comes from, I've watched a ton of Power Rangers, and I've, ever since I was a little kid, I would, act out what the Power Rangers were doing on the screen to some extent. And I learned to recognize the tropes in terms of the cuts and the camera angles. If the punch comes to the screen, they would immediately cut away and
don't attack me. Right, this is through a screen.
But you see how it works, right? It's very much using the cut to sell the impact, and that's what I'm trying to do at certain times here, to try and mimic the action that I see in Power Rangers. And I got to experiment a little bit more with this sort of action choreography, specifically for the screen. Again, back when I was in college. Although my original major and my first degree was in physics, and I am now a physics teacher as my profession, I also had my other major being electronic media arts and communications, which really boiled down to sort of a catch-all liberal arts major at a technology school, and my particular area of focus was animation and video. Other people might work on graphic design or web design, but I was focusing primarily on animation and video, with a little bit of game design along the way. And so when I had the chance to start making videos, I played around with the action sequences, wanting to sort of recreate some of the stuff that I did, that I'd seen in Power Rangers. So I didn't get to do too much. I could do like the little, but I did pick up on a few little tricks, like when somebody had to be very intimidating, we had the like throat lift, ooh, which is always an intimidating move. But it's really just, you put your hand on somebody, they hold your wrist to make sure it's in a good position, and then they're standing on a chair, they're squatting on a chair, and then they just stand up. And that's all you need to create that throat lift effect. But it's a common intimidating move. You have the upwards camera angle in it, and it just kind of works. I played around with, kind of little fights in the forest, and during one time in my advanced video class, we had sort of an assignment where we would each come into the classroom and demonstrate some sort of skill that we'd picked up for the rest of the class. And I demonstrated how to film a fight scene. And I just had a friend volunteer, and is like, okay, I'm going to show you how to make a fight scene in 10 minutes. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. All right, so I am going to point the camera towards me first. I'm going to do a punch, and a kick, and then I'm gonna, do the neck lift and defeat my enemy. And now I turn the camera over to my friend Chris, and I'm like, okay, Chris, you now need to react with with the punch across the face, kick under the jaw, and then the fall to the ground. And so we shot that very quickly, and then all right, now we transfer it over here, cut, and we cut at the points of impact so that my fist hitting the camera would cut straight to the moment that he started moving, and it can be a matter of frames in terms of how well you sell it. But by the end of the 10 minutes, I'd choreographed, filmed, and edited a fight scene. And that was a great sort of practice run for what I would later end up doing with Power Reviews.
Now, do you have any actual formal fighting experience beyond what you've played around with in your video classes?
Well, I do have a black belt in Taekwondo, but I started Taekwondo in college, and I didn't actually get my black belt until relatively recently. I sort of took a break from it after college and just kind of practiced on my own before eventually going back to it in my early 30s, and then finally getting my black belt like almost I want to say like 15 years after I started doing Taekwondo, which was a pretty big gap. But I did compete in a few. I did go to a few tournaments back in college, and I did train with some very, very good people. I actually got my like yellow belt, green belt, purple belt, brown belt. I actually received all of those from the original Grandmaster of Taekwondo, Grandmaster Sun, who apparently was training in upstate New York, which I did not realize.
Fascinating. It is a small world after all, I suppose.
Yeah, it is, right? And so I've learned how to really make sure that my moves are crisp and clean. Through that, I learned how your body moves when you're engaging in a fight, developing those quick reflexes, and most of the fights that I tend to do are drawing off of that experience. I also did a few years of fencing and kendo, but sadly I've not really ended up incorporating any sword fighting into Power reviews, just because it doesn't feel natural to the story most of the time. And when you do start incorporating props into fight scenes, that's another level of uncertainty and potential danger.
Ah, yes. You could put an eye out with one of those, can't you?
Yeah. So, got to keep the eyes safe. I do have a few fencing foils and sabers on hand, but I never found a good reason to use them in Power Reviews, which is a shame because Dave, who plays one of the main characters, Guy, was actually a fencing instructor for a number of years, or an assistant fencing instructor. So if he and I ever wanted to get into a fencing match, we would know what we were doing.
It must be great to have someone on hand who is reliable with that sort of experience.
Yeah, it's fantastic, really. And that's one of the things you really need to draw on when you're creating something. You need to, if it's a collaborative experience, you need to be able to recognize and make use of the skills of the people that you're working with. So Dave has experience not only with fencing, but also with Aikido. So whenever he was doing a fight scene, I would always make sure to incorporate his ability to do very good rolls. I have the very strong kicks, which, as I said before, managed to net me a few trophies when I would go to the Taekwondo tournaments. So I always try to sell those high kicks, which take it out of you after a while, especially as you get older and arthritis kicks in. But I've managed to fortunately stay limber enough to continue doing that. At the same time, you also work within the limits of your fellow actors. Like, I know that outside of Dave, nobody else can really deliver those high kicks for the most part. Outside of probably Ron, who's been one of the Alphabet Soup agents in the past and a few of the demons in the past, and he's very skilled. And he's one of the people who I could say, if I learned fight choreography from anyone, it's probably mostly Ron. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have him in that original fight scene that I did in episode 35 of the series.
Oh, right. I have managed to catch up on the entire series across the course of this interview, and I realized that was when you fought the 6 Alphabet Soup agents, correct?
Yes, exactly. Wow, you're fast. Okay, that's a little creepy. So, basically, that was going to be the first fight scene of the series, and to make sure that it was executed well and safely, I wanted to have somebody who I trusted there, who could give me guidance. And Ron has been a stunt choreographer in community theater for a number of years, and so I brought him in for that. PJ is another friend who I've also had in as one of the demons. She played another Alphabet Soup agent in episodes 79 and 80, and I tried to draw off of both of their experiences. Like, Ron guided us through doing rolls when we did Titanic the musical to make sure that we'd be able to safely roll down the sinking Titanic. Paula was able to coordinate the big sword fight at the end of the Scottish play.
The Scottish play? Oh, yes! That Scottish play. Yes, I appreciate your restraint in that matter. Can never be too careful when invoking the name of the bard.
Yeah, I figured. So, basically, I had that level of experience. I'd also done, a little bit of sword fighting on stage, but again, that mostly just reinforces the idea of when you're having a fight, you need to keep in mind where the audience is and where your fighting partner is to make sure that you have safe distance, but that it doesn't look like a safe distance.
Could you elaborate a bit more on what you mean by that?
So, when it comes to safe distance versus not looking like a safe distance, a lot of times you'll avoid two people in profile fighting, because if there's a gap between us, you'll see the gap between us. usually you want to make sure that one person's body is covering up something, or that perspective is working in your favor. So like you might do a punch, but if the person is standing right there, you won't see the impact. What you'll see is the person's reaction to the punch. Or if I'm doing kick to somebody who's over here, due to the perspective, you'll see that my foot is in front of them, but you won't be able to tell, am I touching them or not? Like right now, I'm not touching the fireplace. I need to go all the way over here before I'm touching the fireplace. But if I were to do, it looks like I just hit the fireplace. And if I were to put a sound effect in there, then that would sell it that much more. And so those little things are things that you pick up across the course of doing fight choreography. And I'm very proud of how much I've been able to develop that skill. And it has gone hand in hand with my directing experience. You develop an instinct for the framing that's going to work well for the scene and what the pictures are going to be in your mind of how they'll look. Very rarely are they exactly what you're expecting, but they can get pretty darn close if you have a good eye and you position your camera well. And I would really love to delve more into cinematography and camera framing and learning how people make movies look so much better than YouTube videos.
Obviously, I imagine at least part of that is a matter of budget.
Yes, of course, there's budget. Time and budget, resources, but there's little things that you can do to make your product look more professional. And I haven't had a chance to explore too much of that. And that's something that I'd really love to be able to dive into maybe in future projects. But I think that just about covers everything as far as what went into creating that scene, which was a question I think you asked me maybe half an hour ago, and I'm sorry if it took longer than expected to answer.
Oh, please, by all means, don't apologize for that. You're making my job very easy right now.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So, next question, I guess, if we have another half an hour? I don't know. Go for it.
Well, you did mention a desire for future projects. Can you tell us anything about what you have planned for the future?
Well, with regards to Power Reviews, obviously I am looking at concluding that series. The timeline has been very malleable, but I am still working hard to try and be able to complete the series by the end of the year. Knock on wood. But after Power Reviews, I am planning to continue with the rapid run-throughs and deeper looks that I've done in the past. Because I know the second half of Dino Fury has been released. No spoilers.
Oh, come on. We need to talk about it. Did you know about Lord Zed and...
No. We're not going to talk about that. I mean, I've seen it. I've taken notes. I am planning to write the scripts and create the videos for those rapid run-throughs and deeper looks. I just haven't had the time, and I really want to focus on completing the finale first. So those will likely be at the beginning of next year, maybe during the lead up to Power Rangers Cosmic Fury.
Now, when it comes to Cosmic Fury, will you be continuing the rapid run-throughs and deeper looks?
I intend to. I wasn't sure if I was going to at first because honestly I'd been feeling a little overwhelmed throughout the course of the last 2 years. Well, really, I've been feeling overwhelmed a lot, but specifically over the course of this past year, the rapid run-throughs and deeper looks were feeling like they might have been a little bit more trouble than they were worth due to how they were drawing time away from Power Reviews and being able to finish. But considering that I'm looking to have the series be done before I continue. And considering that Cosmic Fury is only going to be 10 episodes on, and it is going to be a continuation of Power Rangers Dino Fury, I felt obligated, really, to finish what I had started and go through those final 10 episodes to get a full perspective of Dino Fury and Cosmic Fury.
Excellent. So those are the projects that you're looking to continue or wrap up. Do you have any new projects on the horizon?
Well, I mean, I'd really like to play around some more with some form of short film format. Like, I'd love to do another project like Power Rangers Grid Defense. Oh, would you be continuing that series? No, I think that ship has sailed. You know, Tokimei Sentai Go Busters has had its full adaptation now. So if I were to do another fan film in that vein, it would likely be for a different Sentai series. But nothing like that in the next year. I would want to take a bit of a break from major scripted content for at least next year. I need to focus on my family and my health and my job and various other elements of life. And I haven't had a real proper break like that for the past decade. So I do need to take a break from major scripted content like that. Well, that's perfectly understandable, though I would say it's somewhat disappointing. Yeah, it is what it is. But I am thinking of getting into some less scripted content. Specifically, since next year is going to be the 30th anniversary of Power Rangers, which is a big deal, I really would like to celebrate that. I don't want to go all out in terms of production and burn myself out again, but I do want to acknowledge and celebrate the 30th anniversary of the series. And I'd really love to highlight the people who have put so much work into creating the series. So what I've been thinking of is sort of maybe a monthly interview series where I could sit down with different like writers or producers or directors and work through their process, work through their influences, get to know them a little bit better, maybe get them to share some stories about their lives, and sort of better understand what goes into making Power Rangers.
Interesting. Do you really think there's a market for that?
Well, I certainly hope so. I certainly hope there's an audience for that, and if anyone's watching right now, maybe they could comment below and let me know if they'd like to see something like that in the future. Thinking about what the name might be. I want to try and play around with it, make it more than the standard interview series. Maybe something sort of in the realm of like inside the actor's studio with James Lipton, maybe playing with that sort of character.
You really think anyone would get that reference? I think it's been a little while since that show's heyday.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, I think it would be fun, the very dignified interviewer in a very casual setting interview, and a nice little juxtaposition, and I think I could have fun with that.
Well, I suppose I could imagine there being at least some audience for that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking of. And if I were to do it, I think the name that I'm leaning towards is Morphin Masterclass. Again, playing into that inside the actor's studio kind of vibe.
The name does have a certain ring to it, I will admit.
I thought you might. So, I've interviewed people on the channel before. I'd love if I could invite them to come back. And it would be a great chance for me to continue a journey that I've been on for a very long time. I've always wanted to work on Power Rangers. That has been, the dream goal, the dream job for someday. Obviously, my current profession is as a teacher, but I'm still a creative. I'm still writing and directing and acting in all these different projects that I've been doing for this channel for the last 10 years. And I do hope that someday I could get my foot in the door and work on Power Rangers. And perhaps if I could learn from the people who have done that, maybe that would get me a little closer to living that dream. And if I could share that information with the world, maybe it can help other people get a little closer to realizing their dreams.
Well, that is a very nice sentiment, and I do wish you all the best of luck in that endeavor.
Thank you.
Now, it does appear that we have reached the point in our program where we address questions from our audience, provided you still have the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
So our first question is from Hayden Reviews, who asks, what was the inspiration for the DRPR channel / storyline?
Well, I'd love to use the Harlan Ellison answer and say that they're all from a little man in Schenectady, but really, as I think almost any creative will tell you, most large works don't really have a singular point of inspiration. DRPR is really sort of a conglomeration of a lot of different influences. Simply the inspiration for the channel, I can trace back to That Guy with the Glasses channel awesome genre of videos, which I was first introduced to through Linkara. I remember back in Power Morphicon 2010, I went to attend a misting, reviewing an episode of Power Rangers in the style of Mystery Science Theater 3000 that Linkara was a part of. And I remember enjoying that panel, and I remembered that I had seen people talking online about Linkara's history of the Power Rangers, but I already was very familiar with the history of the Power Rangers in general, and I wasn't familiar with Linkara at that time, so I hadn't felt any need to go watch these videos, or even really knew that they were videos. I just knew that it was a project that someone was working on, and that they were reviewing the series from the beginning, from the perspective of someone who hadn't seen every single season. And I'm like, well, I already have, so why would I check this out? But then I actually saw him in person, and I'm like, oh, this is an interesting, okay, so it's a comedic kind of thing. Maybe I'll check out his work online. And so I saw a history of the Power Rangers and Atop the Fourth Wall, which of course led to seeing the Nostalgia Critic and the rest of the channel awesome crew. Now, sadly, there were definitely abuses of power within that organization, and things came to a messy end. But I was not aware of any of that at the time, and I simply saw it as an interesting creative outlet that a lot of people were engaging in on this channel. And so I'm like, you know what? I've been looking for a creative project. I hadn't been able to perform in a play for a number of years because my work schedule didn't really allow for it. I'd been working part-time and as an independent contractor, and door-to-door knife salesman, and I hadn't been able to commit to a rehearsal schedule and been able to do a play. But I see these people doing these videos in their homes, and I'm like, I could do that. And that could be something where I could write and direct and perform, which were all things that I really missed doing and wanted to do again. I was in a bit of a rough spot of my life, and I needed that outlet. And this seemed like a good approach to that. And so when I started working on it, I had to think about what I could do to set myself apart. I knew that it was going to have to be about Power Rangers because that's my personal special interest. But I decided that the best way to set it apart was history of the Power Rangers was about full-on seasons. I would get into the nitty-gritty of individual episodes. And nobody else was really doing that at the time. And to my knowledge, I think I've been the one doing video reviews of Power Rangers episodes for the longest out of anyone on YouTube. To my knowledge, I know that there were a few people who I think were doing brief episode reviews back then who don't still do them, and I know that there were people who started doing video reviews after I had. I think Orange Ranger is probably the one who's been doing it almost as long as I have, and has had that long continual string. And he and I have become friends, and he's done the voice of Darkonda in Power Reviews. So make sure again to check out the finale to see more of that. But the main series that most inspired me were Nostalgia Critic, by virtue of him being really the originator of the channel and kind of the level setter for the genre, but to a greater extent Linkara, because that was really my introduction to the genre and the introduction to the idea of it really being a character with storylines. And then Brows Held High by Kyle Calgren, who I've also, both Linkara and Kyle Calgren, I've since had a chance to meet, and I've had a chance to meet Linkara in person, and I've had a chance to become friends online with Kyle, although we haven't had a chance to meet in person yet. And one of the things I thought was really cool about his channel was how his reviews paralleled the medium that he was reviewing in terms of theme. It wasn't something that he did for every video that he was covering, but it was something that he did enough that it inspired me in that regard. Especially his Melancholia review, which really demonstrated to me how a review series could be a dramatic medium. And that really inspired some of the harder hitting emotional moments of the series. So that's how the channel was really inspired by those influences. But in terms of the larger story, much of that evolved from various headcanons that I had, and from just sort of the circumstances of making the show. I liked the idea of the drop-in Power Rangers characters, and bringing in MJ as Dr. K felt like a natural thing to do. And I'm like, okay, if I'm going to have MJ playing Dr. K, shouldn't I also be a Power Rangers character? And wouldn't it be funny if it turned out I was the true identity of the Phantom Ranger? And I just really dug into thinking about what events would lead to that. So that was really what sort of sparked the germ of the series. It was less an individual thing that inspired the storyline per se, and more the storyline evolved out of things I had already thought of regarding Power Rangers continuity, and what I felt would be appropriate for me to attempt in trying to do a review series. And as it became clear in my mind that I wanted to do something more serialized, that's where other influences started to filter in. Obviously, Power Rangers as a franchise is a major influence for a lot of the series, but also I had watched Babylon 5, which is MJ's favorite show of all time, and I became really inspired by J. Michael Straczynski's Herculean task of writing, like, I want to say it was 90-something episodes out of a 110 episode run across the course of 5 years. And that was just so impressive to me, along with just all the scripts that had been written by Chip Lynn and Jackie Marchand during the post-Zordon era of Power Rangers, and how all of that had come together. But Babylon 5 in particular, the fact that he had done that 5-year structure where things were seeded in early on that paid off later, which really set the bar for a lot of sci-fi that came after it. That was a big inspiration for me in terms of how I wanted to go about writing the series and constructing the storyline. The story itself just kind of naturally evolved out of the wish to do a show in this genre, but the execution was definitely inspired very much by J. Michael Straczynski and other sci-fi writers for television who've done these big, sprawling myth arc stories through television. And that's what I wanted to try and do through my show. So I hope that answers that question. I know it was a long one.
Not a problem. Our next question, which is rather similar, is from FalconFlyer75, who also asks about the inspiration for DRPR's story, but would like to know, did you make it up as you go? And how much of your original vision changed over the decade?
Okay, so no matter how much you may plan something in advance, there's always some degree of making it up as you go. And that usually comes down to the details of the dialogue and specific actions and specific commentaries, and how details emerge. Now, across the course of the decade, the show I wouldn't say has changed a lot, because really by 2015, the story was pretty well locked. Very little changed in the story after 2015. That was when I had started writing year 3, and I had already decided what episodes I was going to be reviewing, and in broad strokes, what would be the subjects of the story, what story elements would emerge in each of those episodes. And really, the broad scope of the series, I'd worked out even sooner than that. By the time I'd released the first episode, I knew what year 1 would look like. By the time that I finished year 0, I knew what the end of the series was going to be. And in terms of what evolved in between, it usually was a matter of figuring out how to get from point A to point B. I knew what the next big plot point would be, but it was a matter of how to get there. So like the Summer Saga, I didn't come up with until after I'd finished year 1. I knew that I wanted to have the T Omega arc, and I knew that I wanted to have the Evil Database Ranger arc, but I didn't realize what I was going to be doing in between those two arcs until I'd finished year 1, and I was really thinking about, okay, how do we get from this point to that point? Oh, these characters need to evolve in these directions in order to deal with the threat of an evil ranger. So there was those points of discovery. Episode 87 was another example of something that really evolved out of the story kind of sprawling out more than expected, as I realized I had so much backstory for these characters that I hadn't had a chance to dive into. And during the Time Storm arc, I presented myself with an opportunity to delve into these backstories a little bit more intensely and with more intent. But beyond that, other things have been shaped by simple things like actor availability. You know, some actors have had to drop out, and I've had to write around those actors no longer being available. The first secretary had a kid, availability vanished, and so I had to write in the new secretary. The more Postners were no longer up for really filming a lot, so that's why I had them get knocked out by Darkonda, and that kind of took them out of the action for a while. Same thing with, with R Beta. That was actually, okay, that was one that evolved out of actor availability. I'm going to get into that one.
Oh, please do.
Okay, so Rachel, my actress for R Beta, was going to be moving away, and I had to figure out how to write her out of the show for at least a temporary span until she could come back to visit to maybe film some final scenes. And the way that I ended up writing her out was I realized that she would be the perfect vessel for bringing back Darkonda. She was the only person on the ship she was the only agent on the ship who had their alternate universe counterpart there on the ship with them, so that would be perfect for creating R Omega, which could then merge with all the other agents to bring about Darkonda. I knew that K Alpha was going to create Darkonda through using the cat's cradle with the more Posners, but I didn't realize the opportunity that our beta presented until I had to deal with her having to be written out of the show. And that was just one of those cases where I made something up on the fly and it ended up really working, and it grew out of an actor no longer being available. So it's remarkable how those challenges lead to new storytelling opportunities. And there have been countless other small examples of that, even as the main story has remained intact throughout the majority of the series.
Now, here on the show, we do like to highlight not only the people who put in so much work behind the scenes, but also any worthy causes that they may choose to support. So, do you have anything that you would like to shine a light upon?
Yes. In past years, I have raised funds for various voting rights organizations. Specifically, Spread the Vote is one that I really feel passionately about, because they help to get voting ID to people who might not otherwise have access to that. Make sure they get registered and have access to their driver's licenses. And it really is helpful for people who are homeless or unhoused, or people who have otherwise fallen on hard times, people who were previously incarcerated but have paid their debt to society and want to be able to reintegrate into society, and having valid identification is a big step towards that. So I would really like for anyone who watches this video to go to spreadthevote.org and please donate what you can to help people vote in the upcoming elections. Other great organizations that you could also contribute to are Fair Fight and the New Georgia Project for assisting in Georgia's efforts for greater voting rights. And there's just so many other organizations and different ways that people can volunteer and contribute. I know that personally, I'm going to be taking a bit of a break from working on the show and working on my weekly live streams to instead volunteer through phone banking for the midterm elections. I think that it's extremely important for people to exercise their right to vote, and it's one of our few safeguards against various dangers to society, including not only the rise of fascism, but also climate change and various other forms of oppression and negative impacts on people's health and well-being. So if you're able to volunteer, I do recommend the organization swingleft.org. It's got a great compilation of different events that are going on. If you want to engage in phone banking or texting or writing letters or postcards, or if you want to know who to donate to or what races are going to have the greatest impact, go to swingleft.org and you can find all of that compiled. Or if there's other organizations that you think are great and really help you and you want to see get highlighted, please comment down below with those organizations as well. I would really like it if Morphin Masterclass, when it's done monthly, each time that we have a guest, we could have them plug for some major charity or other group that they wish to raise funds for. And I wish to sort of restructure my Patreon to be less about funding the channel, because frankly, I don't really have time in my life to coordinate rewards, and I haven't been good about that in the past. And while additional contributions are always appreciated, I recognize that they could be better used in other areas. So I'm going to reformat our Patreon to be sort of a central funding site where if you do pledge to our Patreon, we will each month donate your Patreon contribution, or some large portion of it, if not 100% of it, to some charity. I will post more details of that as I am able to do the update of the Patreon. But I would love it if basically it's just like, okay, you sign up for our Patreon and you can know that every month your contribution is going to go to a good cause. And that's a way that I feel like I could use this channel to not solely like benefit myself and my creative and my creative pursuits, but to benefit others and to make the world around me a better place. So for this time round, at spreadthevote.org, but please let me know if there's anything that you'd like to call attention to, and I'll try and see if I can highlight that at some point in the future as well. So that's my plug. I know it was a long plug. There was a lot of plugging going on there, as well as the potential for more plugs in the future.
Well, if it's all for a good cause, I'd say it's worth the time. Unfortunately, it does look like we are just about out of time for today. So, Mr. Brody, I do just want to say thank you again for joining me here.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I hope that you will all join us again next time for another Morphin Masterclass.